Civilization VII offers a new twist on the age-old formula, though while its most radical ideas certainly offer an interesting way to play the game, I don't think it can be declared an outright success. This is the most pared back and stripped down the series has been in years, which certainly helps with accessibility and pacing, especially in multiplayer, but is missing the depth and mechanical diversity I loved about its predecessors. Let's start with its biggest change: age transitions. Each game is split into 3 ages: Antiquity, Exploration, Modern, and each time you move into a new one, it skips several hundred years, at which point you pick from one of a bunch of new civs to lead, specific to that era, though your leader remains the same. So you may start with Egypt in Antiquity, then move on to Normans in the Exploration Age before landing on the good old US of A to see you through the Modern era. Each civ has unique units, bonuses, and a dedicated civic tree with special policies, some of which you can carry over into the next era's civ as traditions. I found this age transition pretty jarring, even though it's by design. As you near the end of an age, which all civs collectively reach by making progress down 4 linear legacy paths, the world will face some kind of crisis, such as plague or barbarian invasions. Once the crisis reaches its head, the current iteration of your civilization collapses and you pick a new one to build over its foundations. This is definitely the kind of dramatic change you'd want to see in a sequel. With each new era, you'll lose any units that aren't stacked into commanders. All cities outside your capital revert to towns, more on those later, and buildings specific to the previous era lose their adjacency bonuses, meaning you'll want to build over them with more modern, higher yield ones. Your empire's borders and settlements will remain intact, however, and your achievements of the previous era unlock boons for the next one in the form of legacy points, attained by hitting milestones along the previous era's 4 legacy paths: economy, military, science, and culture. New eras usher in new game systems. You get pantheons in Antiquity. Religions and settling distant lands drive the exploration age, while the modern era ushers in archaeological exploration and the ideologies of fascism, democracy, and communism, inevitably, in my experience, lead into epic ideological warfare. This is all good stuff, making each era feel somewhat self-contained and defined by unique goals and mechanics. It does mean that such joyful scenarios as phalanx spearmen resolutely poking at tanks or cavemen smacking helicopters out of the sky with clubs are now gone. But if you want that, then you're spoiled for choice with the preceding 6 games. From a pacing perspective, this works wonders because at a point in previous games, things would start getting a bit stodgy in terms of unit clutter, city micromanagement, and the winners and losers feeling like a foregone conclusion well before the game ends. Civ 7 speeds things up and narrows the gap between the early leaders and losers. The soft resets and feature drip of the age system does a lot to keep the game fresh, but the modern age still feels weakest. It's a bit of a shame that the World Congress has been removed because the diplomatic scheming that comes with voting on resolutions would have added a lot of flavour to the modern age.
Yo soy Doña Isabel, monarca de estos reinos y señoríos.
Civ's age-old system of citizen management in cities has been replaced by slottable resources. So if you've just built a town, you can send it some grub to accelerate growth, or send some gypsum over to a new distant land city that'll give it a nice, big production boost. But while the idea of distributing resources throughout your empire to where they're most needed is good in principle, by the late game I had gotten a bit fatigued with the resource screen, which winds up containing dozens of little icons to chop and change between cities. The UI isn't great. It often requires one too many clicks to get the details you want. There's no shortcut key to scroll through inactive units, nor a way to get an overview of all your units on the map. Where similar games use nested menus and text highlighting to give you quick info about key concepts, in Civ 7, I need to go and type things into the Civilopedia to get basic info on things like building effects or unit combat bonuses. City building has changed a bit too. Where in Civ 6 I built distinct districts dedicated to each of the game's key currencies, my cities are now divided into urban tiles which have 2 slots for each building and rural ones. Builder units have been done away with altogether, which means, thankfully, there's a lot less messing around. Instead, each time a city grows, you get to instantly upgrade one tile in its vicinity with rural improvements like mines, farms, and plantations. What I like about the new approach to city building is how much more fluidity and flexibility there is about how to specialize. The ability to build over outdated buildings in a new age invites you to overhaul a city's production focus. A city that you founded in antiquity as a military border stronghold might not have that purpose 500 years later once your borders have expanded. So why not turn it into a lucrative economic hub for the exploration age? Many of the design changes help keep turn times, particularly in the late game, nice and trim, but sometimes Civ 7's substantial fat trimming goes a bit far, losing richness and flavour in the process.
Vos solamente facéis mártires.
There's the diplomacy for a start, which feels very thin, where before leaders would come to you voicing their opinions on actions of yours, share little aphorisms, partake in gossip, or ask you to move your armies away from their borders. Now interactions have been largely reduced to generic, repeatable agreements like research collaborations. I can't see myself ever developing a lifelong grudge against any of them like I did with the nuke-loving Gandhi of previous games. They're too boring. AI leaders are a lot less sassy this time around, and therefore less characterful. Here's a small change that had a surprising impact for me. During interactions, leaders are no longer looking out from the screen at you, but side on at the leader you picked. It makes me feel a bit detached from these interactions, like I'm the translator at their meeting rather than a leader being addressed directly. Gone also is the freewheeling bargaining system, where you could demand, say, a city, tons of gold per turn, and a sheep from enemies in exchange for not going to war. The only bargaining chips in peace treaties are now cities, which the AI seems way too happy to give away, while resources are automatically acquired from other civs when you establish trade routes. So you can't lord over other civs by hogging valuable strategic resources anymore. This iteration of civilization is also weirdly, well, civil. City-states and barbarians from previous games have been rolled into independent powers, who you can befriend and evolve into city-states by spending influence points. Once you start the befriending process, you're basically guaranteed to become their suzerain for the rest of the age unless they get wiped out. There are no more city-state quests, and no more tussling among civs for the support of these minor powers via envoys or outright bribery. What was once an interesting and sneaky way to gain diplomatic leverage has effectively been reduced to the single click of a button once you have enough influence. Religions and governments have also faced severe cuts. Religion somehow manages to feel both unrewarding and frustratingly hands-on to actually play, and simply involves sending missionaries to convert other cities, which you have to do on both an urban and rural tile if that city already has a religion. Converted cities no longer passively spread religion. There are no religious diplomatic effects, nor is there any of that wild religious combat that saw Inquisitors striking missionaries down with divine lightning in Civ 6. To be clear, most of Civ 7's shortcomings are relative to the two very fleshed out and still popular games preceding it in the series, which for me continue to rule over the genre. And there are some pretty clear improvements here. The late game feels a lot snappier, and war feels better than ever, even if the AI can't entirely handle its tactical complexity. Replacing the great generals of previous games are commanders, who can move armies around in stacks and have their own skill trees that offer some nice new strategies relating to unit positioning. Newly navigable rivers have some serious strategic merit too, and I've already had some good times sending dreadnoughts upriver deep into enemy civ territory to bombard them from within. And this one may come down to personal taste, but I also like that visually the game builds on the more realistic art style of Civ 5 rather than the cartoon stylings of Civ 6. For me, a game where you're decimating entire populations and dropping nukes calls for grounded, serious presentation. Civilization 7 feels like a reaction to the maximalism of its predecessor, sleeker and speedier, colder and less complex. Being the first game in the series to come out on consoles at the same time as PC, it's possible some of the complexity cutbacks are made with gamepad players in mind. Many of the changes, especially the rubber banding effects of the new age system, should help the multiplayer experience flow a little better, but I'm not sure that this should have come at the cost of once rich systems like religion, diplomacy, city-states, and espionage. I guess if Civ 7 teaches us anything, it's that age transitions take a few steps forward, a few steps back, and it's only with the expansions that we'll really see its full vision realised. As things stand though, a little too much has been stripped away for veterans like myself to call this meaningful progress on the series' legacy path.